subscribe to our YouTube channel, Joy Learning TV.
Hello there. Welcome once again to the Joy Learning channel, the SHS Hour. And I am Madam Judith, your tutor for course accounting. Today on our lesson, we are going to look at break-even analysis. I'm sure most of you have heard this in your various schools. Now today we are going to make it simple to calculate so that when we go back to our classroom, we'll be able to solve questions given to us by our teachers. Let's look at our objectives for the day. By the end of our lesson today, you should be able to define break-even analysis. You should also be able to say the advantages and disadvantages of break-even analysis. And then you should be able to explain fixed cost and variable cost. You should also be able to explain the various terminologies used under break-even analysis. And lastly, you should be able to calculate the break-even point for an organization. So let's get rolling. I hope you are ready. Yes, if you are ready, I am also ready. What is break-even analysis? It's also known as cost volume profit analysis. It is also known as what? Cost volume analysis. So if you don't see break-even analysis and you meet cost volume profit analysis, don't say you have not seen it before. It's the same thing. Break-even analysis is the same as cost volume profit analysis. What is break-even analysis? We are saying it is the term given to the study of the interrelationship between cost, volume, and profit. It is the term given to the study of the interrelationship that exists between cost, volume, and profit at various levels of activity. So per each production or each different level of activity or output an organization wants to produce, we want to know the relationship that exists between the cost, the unit or the quantity of units produced, and then the profits that has been made. So these are the comparisons that we have to make, or the relationship we have to look out for, which is between what cost, the volume, and then the profit at various levels of what? Activity. That is, at each output of volume, we have to look for the relationship that exists among the three. It can also be defined as a system of analyzing cost into fixed and variable components to determine the probable profit at any given level of activity. It is also defined as a system of analyzing cost into fixed and variable components to be able to determine the probable profit at any given level of activity. So break-even helps an organization to determine their profit level so that they can take any action to be able to increase or improve their profitability. So that is break-even analysis. Let's look at variable cost and fixed cost, which we are going to use it in our computation for break-even analysis. I know in Form 1, the beginning of your semester, and types of costs, we looked at the variable cost and then the fixed cost. So I'm sure you all understand this from the basis. So let's build on it. What is variable cost? This I can leave you to write in your jotter. Within a few minutes, you should be able to put down what a variable cost is. But for our lesson today, I will help you. So variable cost is defined as a cost which tends to vary or change with the level of activity. It's defined as a cost which tend to vary or change with the level of activity. So per each activity or unit or quantity produced, variable cost is said to change. It does not remain what? Constant. But that's cost which changes directly with the level of sales, output, and cost. So per each level of activity, we have variable cost being changing. Then we say there, in break-even analysis, the variable cost per unit is assumed to be constant. That is the variable cost per unit. It is assumed to be constant. Therefore, the variable cost curve is linear. And then the variable cost per unit curve is parallel to the output axis. So we have the variable cost curve itself being linear because that one, it changes. But because the variable cost per unit has been assumed to be constant, the variable cost per unit curve is not linear like the variable cost curve. That one is what? It is parallel to the output axis. So we take a look at how the curve look like. So we have the variable cost curve. As we said, it is linear to the output axis. So we have the y-axis where we indicate the cost or revenue. Then we have the x-axis where we indicate what the output. Now we said the variable cost curve is what? Is linear to the output axis. So it means it is not constant. It changes as the level of output changes. So we have the variable cost curve being linear. So we label it variable cost. So this is how the variable cost curve looks like. We have the cost on the y-axis, the output on the x-axis, and then the variable curve itself, which is linear to the output axis because it changes as output changes. When your output goes up, it means it's what? It's climbing. Then let's look at the variable cost per unit curve. We said is what? It's parallel to the x-axis or the output axis. So let's look at how it will also look like. So we have the variable cost per unit curve. We have the y-axis, we label it as cost. Then we have the x-axis. Then we label that as what? The output. Good. Now said is what? Is parallel to the output axis. It means it's constant. Whether output or quantity level changes or not, it is constant. That is why you see the variable cost curve like that. So that is the difference between the variable cost curve and then the variable cost per unit curve. Now let's look at how to calculate for the per unit cost of variable. So we have the variable cost per unit is equal to variable cost divided by output. If you want to determine the variable cost per unit, we divide the variable cost by the output to ascertain the per unit variable cost. Then we have the fixed cost. If the variable cost varies or changes with regards to the level of output, then what will be the fixed cost? Yes, whatever you are thinking, I know it is the correct one because you have done this in your first year. So fixed cost does not change while the variable cost does, or it changes with the level of output. So let's look at the definition of a fixed cost. I hope whatever I have on your screens is what you are able to put down in your jotters. So we say the fixed cost may be defined as a cost which is incurred for a period and which within certain output and sales limits tends to be affected by change in the level of output. So with this, it does not change, it is constant. Examples are rent and rates. Whether the economy is hard, the amount you have paid for the year remains same, is constant, it wouldn't change. Insurance, then we have salaries of managers, just to mention a few. So these are a few examples of our fixed cost. We also see it as what? A period cost, because most of the times it is written off against our contribution. So fixed cost seen as what? A period cost. Now let's look at cost curve. Is also just like the variable cost per unit curve, because it's also what? Parallel to the out axis. So let's look at how it will look in a graph form. We have the fixed cost curve, that is the y-axis, and we label it as what? Cost. Then we have the x-axis. We label that also as what? Output. Then let's look at how the fixed cost curve will look like. Because it's constant, it is what? Fixed. It does not change as output level changes. So that is how the fixed cost line look like. We label it as what? Fixed cost. So that is our fixed cost curve. Now, how do we determine the fixed cost per unit? That is the fixed cost divided by output. To determine the fixed cost per unit, we have the fixed cost divided by the output to ascertain the per unit cost of fixed cost. Now, what are some of the assumptions of break-even analysis? There have been so many assumptions underlying break-even analysis. Let's look at a few. So some of the assumptions of break-even analysis are, they say all costs can resolve into fixed and variable costs. We know the total cost of a product is made up of what? Fixed and variable costs. So one of the assumptions of break-even is that all costs can be resolved into fixed and variable, though it may not always be true, because we can have semi-variable and semi-fixed costs. But this is the assumption that the total cost of a product has been resolved into what? Both fixed and variable cost. The total fixed cost will remain unchanged over the relevant volume range of the break-even analysis. Means the fixed cost will remain what? Constant. It wouldn't change within the relevant volume range of the break-even analysis. So that is another assumption of break-even analysis. Then we have all quantities produced are sold. It is an assumption, I know, because let's take Voltic water. All the bottles they produce, are you sure they sell that within a particular period? No. But there is an assumption underlying break-even analysis. So we are only going to work with the assumptions, but we know that definitely there will be limitations to all these assumptions. But in the meanwhile, let our focus be on the assumption. So the assumption says all quantities produced in an organization are sold. Then we have prices of the factors of production, that is the input, are to be unchanged. The prices of the factors of production, that is the input, are to be unchanged. So they are constant. Then we have the technology, production methods, and efficiency are also to remain unchanged. So that is technology that we are using in production will never change. You know, this one, it doesn't hold, but it is an assumption, as I said. So these are some of the assumptions underlying break-even analysis. The technology, production methods, and efficiency are also to remain unchanged. Let's look at some advantages of the break-even analysis. What we looked at earlier is the assumptions, but what are the importance, the benefits, the uses, or the advantages of break-even analysis? One, it can be used to fix selling prices that can enable a firm make desired profit. So the break-even, as I mentioned earlier, is the analysis is to compare or study the relationship that exists between cost, volume, and profit. So once you know your cost, you know the quantity you have produced, you know your profit, you will be able to fix the selling prices for your product, which you will ascertain a desired profit for the organization. It also can be used for inter-firm comparison of profitability. If you have an organization doing what you are offering to the community, you can compare your profits with what they have also done, and then probably you can go by their methods and technology. Then we have variable cost per unit can be calculated easily from a break-even chart. If you want to ascertain the variable cost per unit, aside dividing the variable cost by the units or output, we can also determine the variable cost from the break-even chart. Once you know your fixed cost and you know your total cost, when we subtract our fixed cost from our total cost, we should be able to ascertain our variable cost from the break-even chart. Then, the break-even analysis, it brings out the relationship between cost, volume, and output, as I made mentioned earlier. Then we have the break-even charts, also shows the maximum profit a firm can make under any profit plan. It shows the maximum profit a firm can make under any profit plan. Then it can also show the level of activity below which losses occur and beyond which profit may occur. So if I produce below 100, am I going to make profit? If I produce beyond 200, am I going to make profit? So break-even also help organization determine the level of activity below which they are going to make a loss, and then beyond which there will be a desired profit. Then lastly, it can also be used to set profit targets, and it shows profits and losses at different levels of sales and volume of production. So we can also use what? Our break-even analysis to set profit target, because you know that when I produce 200, it means my cost is going to be the same as my sales. I'm not going to make profit. But at what level can I produce to meet my profit or my set profit or my target profit? So break-even also helps an organization to set a profit target. And this will help them to determine at which sales volume am I going to make profit or loss. I hope that is clear. So let's look at contribution. One of the concepts or terminologies used in break-even analysis. What is contribution? We say contribution is the difference between sales and variable costs. So here we are looking at the total contribution. So contribution is the difference between sales and variable costs. When we less our variable costs from our sales, we should determine our contribution, which sometimes we see it as what? Profit. So our total contribution is equal to fixed cost plus profit. When we are going the other way, we add our profit to our fixed cost to ascertain contribution, or we less our variable cost from our sales to ascertain our contribution. It is worthy also to note that once fixed cost is covered, the contribution is wholly profit, because we said contribution is equal to fixed cost plus profit. So once our fixed costs have been covered, then the profit is seen as what? Contribution, or contribution is what? Wholly profit. Then we say at break-even, when we talk about break-even, means the company is neither making profit nor loss. So at break-even, our contribution is equal to fixed cost. Our contribution is equal to fixed cost. So how do we calculate for contribution? Per our definition, we said is the difference between sales and variable cost. So our contribution is equal to sales less variable cost. That's the formula for calculating for contribution of an organization. Or you multiply your contribution per unit by the unit sold. The contribution per unit by the unit sold. So these are the two methods of calculating for the contribution. Now let's look at contribution per unit. So the first one was the total contribution. Now we are looking for per each unit produced. So contribution per unit is the difference between the selling price and then the variable cost per unit. The first one, we talk about contribution in total. So we made mention that it is the sales less or the variable cost. So if you are looking for the per unit contribution, that is for each unit we produce, what is the contribution? That is for 1 unit, the contribution is equal to the selling price of the unit less the variable cost per unit. So the difference between the selling price and then the variable cost per unit. Contribution per unit is also called contribution margin. How do we calculate contribution per unit? That is the selling price less the variable cost per unit will give us the contribution per unit, or the total contribution divided by the unit sold. So these are the two methods of calculating for the contribution for a particular period. Either you subtract the variable cost from the selling price, or you divide the total contribution by the unit sold. We look at the calculation of the break-even analysis. But before that, we say we have two basic methods of break-even analysis. We have the equation method and then the graphical method. The equation method and the graphical method. For our lesson today, we will center on the equation method, and when we meet again, we will look at the graphical method. So let's take the equation method. But before the equation method is discussed, the following are necessary. You have to know some key things before you can calculate for the break-even analysis. So we have the break-even point. Break-even point. It is a point of activity where total sales or revenue is equal to total cost. How do you understand this? When our revenue is equal to our cost, what happens? It means there is no profit. Once the costs I have incurred in production is equal to the sales revenue, it means I didn't make any profit. If I produce a bottle of wine at 10 cedis and then on the market is being sold at 10 cedis, it means no profit has been made, right? Good. But if my cost for the wine is 8 cedis and then it's being sold on the market as 10 cedis, it means there is a profit of what? 2 cedis. But we are saying that at break-even, the total cost is equal to the total sales or revenue. It means no profit has been made. Good. So that is our break-even point. When you hear that an organization has break-even at a particular period, it means the organization didn't make any profit. So we can say that at the break-even point is the level of activity where neither profit nor loss is made. As I explained, once my cost of producing a product is the same as the sales, then it means that no profit will be made. So we say the organization has break even. But then we have break-even point in units and in sales. So let's look at the difference between the two. Break-even point, that is in units, is a volume of production, that is the quantity when sold, total cost will be equal to total sales. It is the volume of production. We are looking at the quantity. When sold, total cost will be equal to total sales. So here we're not looking at the cost of the units produced. We are looking at the cost of the quantity of units of a product we can sell, which will be equal to the total sales we are going to make at the end of the sales. So at that level, or at that unit, when we sell that number of units, we are not going to make any profit or loss. It means the organization is going to break even when we sell that number of products. That says it is the unit where the firm break even. Then we have break even sales, into bracket the value. Is a sales value where the sales value is equal to the total cost. So that is the value when we make sales. The amount we have is equal to the cost we incurred on the product. Meaning at that level, neither profit or loss is made. And we can say the organization has done what? Break even. So when you hear that an organization has break even, it means the organization is neither making profit nor loss. Whatever they incurred in production is the amount they retrieve from their sales. So their sales is equal to the total cost. That is when a company break even. Then the equation method is based on this simple equation. We have profit is equal to total sales less your total cost, right? As I made mention, if I incur 100 Ghana on a product and I go on the market and sell it at 80, it means I'm running at a loss, right? My sales is lesser than my cost. But once the sales is more than the total cost, it means profit has been made. So if for us to ascertain our profit, we less the cost incurred from the total sales. So if the cost is 100 and we sell the product at 150, it means a profit of what? 50 can be ascertained. So that is the simple equation under the equation method. And we will have to note the following formula under the equation method. We have the break-even point, and that is the fixed cost less contribution per unit. The break-even point in unit, we have the fixed cost less the contribution per unit. Then 2, we have the break-even point in sales. That is the fixed cost divided by the contribution per unit multiplied by the selling price. Once you have ascertained the break-even point in unit, you can even go straight and multiply by the selling price, because we want to know at which sales that the organization will break even, and then at which unit will they sell to break even. So the break-even point in unit is the fixed cost divided by the contribution per unit, and then in sales we multiply by the selling price. Don't forget that. Then we have the contribution to sales ratio. That is the percentage of contribution to sales. That is contribution over the sales multiplied by 100. And then we can also use the contribution per unit divided by the selling price or multiplied by 100. Then we have the level of sales to result in a target profit. So how many units to be sold to meet the target profit the organization have set? The formula is the fixed cost plus the target profit the organization want to achieve, all divided by the contribution per unit. The fixed cost plus target profit, all divided by the contribution per unit. Then at which level of sales will result in the target profit? So we have in units, how many units are we supposed to sell to meet the target profit? And what is the sales value which will result in the target profit? So we have the fixed cost plus target profit divided by the contribution per unit multiplied by the selling price. So once you have been able to ascertain the unit to produce in order to meet target profit, you can go ahead and just multiply by the selling price. So you could see that it's the same formula, but to know in sales, we've just multiplied by the selling price. So once you know the unit to produce to meet your target profit, you can multiply directly with the selling price. We take an illustration on break-even, and then we calculate for the break-even point for the organization. Obins Limited produced a product called Joy. The following information relates to the company's products. You take note as I'm reading through. You are putting the main point down in your jotter so that we can solve it together. We have the selling price as 10 cedis. The variable cost per unit is 8 cedis. Total fixed cost at the end of the period is 8,000 cedis, and then the target profit is 2,000. That means this is what the organization wants to achieve at the end of the period, the profit they want to make on all the units they have produced and sell. They want to meet a target profit of 2,000 Ghana cedis. Your requirement is to compute the break-even point in units and then in sales. The quantity of goods to be sold by the company in order to make the target profit. And then you are supposed to calculate the value of sales that will also result in the target profit. I hope you have your information in your jotter so we can all start working together. Get the formulas, and then it will be easy for you to work. So we start with the break-even point in units. So we have break-even point in units is equal to fixed cost all divided by contribution per unit. Then it is important to note that before we can ascertain the contribution per unit, we have to less the variable cost per unit from the selling price. So our variable cost per unit is 8. We less it from the selling price of 10, giving us 2 Ghana cedis as the contribution per unit. Therefore, the break-even point is equal to the fixed cost of 8,000. So we are putting the information in our formula. We have 8,000 all divided by the contribution per unit of 2 that we just calculated. So that is the 2 here. Before you can get this, you need to subtract the selling price, the variable cost from the selling price, giving us 2. So the first cost per our question is 8,000, and then from our calculation, the contribution per unit is also 2. So we divide the 8,000 by the 2, giving us break-even point in unit as 4,000 units. So this is the total unit the organization needs to produce to break even. So when they produce 4,000 and sell, it means that they are neither going to make a loss nor a profit. So this is the break even in units. I hope that is clear. Good. Now let's look at the break even point in value. That is the sales value that the organization needs to ascertain to break even. So we have the question on the board. We already know that our selling price is 10. Our variable cost per unit is also 8. We subtract our variable cost from the selling price to ascertain the contribution per unit. And then our fixed cost has been given as 8,000 with target profit as 2,000. So let's continue. Question B is asking us to calculate for the break-even point in sales. So we have the break-even point in sales. The formula is the fixed cost divided by the contribution per unit, or multiplied by the selling price. And once we have ascertained our break-even point in units, you realize that the formula is the same. The only difference between the unit and sales is the selling price being multiplied to ascertain the sales value. So once we know that our break-even point in unit is 4,000, we can go ahead. We have break-even point in units, which is equal to 4,000 units. we can multiply by the selling price. So we have 4,000 units multiplying 10, which will give us what? 40,000 cedis. So once we know our break-even point in units, we can go ahead and multiply by the selling price per our formula. Or we continue, we input in our information. We have the fixed cost as 8,000, all divided by the contribution of 2 cedis, which we have already done. That is the selling price less the variable cost, multiplying the selling price of 10, and that will give us 40,000. So as you can see, what I just wrote on your screens, we have the break-even point in units by the selling price giving us a 40,000, and then if you are supposed to go by the break-even point in sales formula, we also ascertain the same 40,000. So that is our break-even point in sales. At this sales value, the organization is neither making profit or loss. We take note of that. And then let's look at our question again. We are using the same question. If you don't have the information, once it's still on your screen, you can still get the main point down. That is the selling price, the variable cost per unit, the total fixed cost, and then the target profit. So let's look at the II. The II is asking for the quantities of goods to be sold by the company in order to make a target profit. What is the target profit of the organization? 2,000 for the period, right? Good. Now let's input in our information in the formula. What is the formula for the unit to produce to meet a target profit? So units to meet a target profit, we have the fixed cost plus the target profit, all divided by the contribution per unit. Now, what is our fixed cost? Our fixed costs have been given as 8,000. Our target profit is 2,000. And then the contribution per unit is 2 cedis. So let's input that. So we have 8,000 plus 2,000, all divided by 2, giving us 10,000 divided by 2. So let's do that quickly with our calculators. What are you getting? Yes, I'm sure you have the same thing on the screen. That is 5,000. 10,000 divided by 2 will give us what? 10,000 units. So for the organization to meet their target profit of 2,000, they will have to produce and sell 5,000 units. So you realize that for them to break even, where there is no profit or loss, they were supposed to produce how many units? 4,000. But now if they want to meet a profit of 2,000, it means they have to produce more. And that is the 5,000 units. When they produce the 5,000 units, they are going to meet their target profit of 2,000 cedis. I hope that is clear, right? Good. So once they produce the 4,000, they are breaking even. But if they increase their output and produce 5,000 units, that is 1,000 extra units plus the 4,000, they are going to what? Have a profit of 2,000 Ghana cedis. Let's look at the D. So the question for us to go through again, we have the selling price. You know that already. I'm sure you have that down. Then we have the variable cost per unit of 8. Our total fixed cost is 8,000, and then the target profit is still 2,000. The question says the value of sales that will result in the target profit. We already know the target profit as what? 2,000. So how much are we supposed to make to be able to meet this target profit? That's the sales value we are supposed to make to meet this 2,000. So let's look at the II part of our question. So sales to meet the target profit is what? Equal to the target profit plus the fixed cost divided by the contribution per unit, all multiplying the selling price. So from our C, we realize that the unit to produce to meet a target profit was what? 5,000 units, right? 5,000 units. And what is our selling price per the question? So we multiply the 5,000 units by our selling price. So then we multiply the 5,000 by the selling price of 10, which will give us what? 50,000 cedis. So with these two, once we already know the unit to produce to meet the target profit, which was 5,000, we can multiply it directly with the selling price to ascertain the sales to meet a target profit. Other than that, if you are going by the formula, then it means we have to add our target profit plus the fixed cost, or dividing the contribution per unit, and then we multiply it by the selling price. So we have the 2,000 plus the 8,000. We have the 2,000 as the target profit, the 8,000 as our fixed cost, or dividing contribution of 2, multiplying the selling price of 10. So we have 10,000 divided by 2, or multiplying 10. And this will give us what? 50,000. When we go by the formula, we are also seeing that if we multiply the units to produce to meet a target profit, which I wrote down here, will give us the 50,000 cedis. And then when we go by the formula 2, we will ascertain 50,000 as the sales value to meet their target profit of 2,000 Ghana cedis. So once you know the units produced to meet a target profit, you can go ahead and multiply by the selling price, or you go by the formula, which will give you the same answer. Or the unit to meet the target profit times the selling price. That is what I have worked down there for you. So you can already say the 4,000 units by 10, giving us 50. Now let's look at the margin of safety. Margin of safety, which is another terminology or concept used in break-even analysis. The margin of safety is the excess of the actual or budgeted sales over the break-even sales. So the budgeted sales over the break-even sales, the difference is what we are looking at as the margin of safety. Then we have, we can also look at the units aspect. So the first one is looking at the sales. So it can also be referred to as the excess of actual or budgeted unit over break-even unit. So if the budgeted unit is more than the break-even unit, then we should tell what we are achieving. So the excess of the budgeted either sales or unit over the break-even sales or unit, that is our margin of safety. And we are saying that the margin of safety plays an important role in making inter-firm comparison. Plays an important role in making an inter-firm comparison. I showed you one of the importance or the advantage of the break-even analysis itself, organization to make what inter-firm comparison when it comes to what profit. This will help them to determine whether they are making profit or they are performing or not. The margin of safety is calculated as follows. We have the total units less the break-even units when we are looking at the units, or the total sales less the break-even sales. And then we can also have the margin of safety. The formula, it is calculated as either profit over the CS ratio. We've already looked at the CS ratio as a percentage of sales, contribution as a percentage of sales, and we said is the contribution divided by the sales. Now if you want to determine the margin of safety, we can also have the profit over the CS ratio, or if you are looking at margin of safety in percentage, then that's the total output, that's the budgeted unit less the break-even unit, and then we divide it by the budgeted unit, or multiplying by 100 for us to achieve the margin of safety in percentage. Then we can also have the sales. If you are not using the unit and we are using the sales, then it has to be the total or budgeted sales less the break-even sales, or divided by the total sales, and then we multiply it by 100. So let's look at contribution to sales ratio, which is also referred to as the profit volume ratio. So in some books you see PV ratio, and then in some books you see CS ratio. They are the same thing, or what? Contribution percentage. So most of the times you hear PV ratio. PV ratio is the same as the contribution to sales ratio. So the PV ratio is known as the profit volume ratio, or the contribution to sales ratio is also known as what? Contribution percentage. When you hear that, what is it? What is the CS ratio? It refers to as the contribution as a percentage of sales. The contribution as a percentage of sales of a product. How do we calculate it? This gives a guidance in the variation in contribution, which will be caused by a variation in sales. This is our CS ratio. How do we calculate for our CS ratio? We said the CS ratio is calculated as the contribution per unit divided by the selling price per unit, or multiplied by 100. Contribution per unit divided by the selling price per unit, or multiplied by 100. If you are using the sales, then it's going to be or we are using the total contribution, then it's going to be the contribution over sales, or multiplied by 100. But if you are looking for the unit price, then it will be the contribution per unit, or divided by the selling price, multiplying 100. So let's look at some likely examination questions, which will help us as a recap of what we've done today. So let's use our questions to do a recap of what we've done on break-even analysis today. So say, what is break-even analysis? Let's write that quickly in our jotters. Yes. Break-even analysis. We made mention that it is the study of the interrelationship between cost, volume, and then profit at any given level of activity. At any given level of activity. So that is our break-even analysis. And you are asked to differentiate between fixed cost and then variable cost. We treated all these as a type of cost when we're in Form 1. And we said the variable cost varies, or it changes at various levels of activity, whilst the fixed is constant. We most of the time look at what? A period cost. Is that clear? So that is the difference between the fixed and variable cost. The fixed the fixed is constant, and then the variable cost varies at different levels of activity. In the following, as used under break-even analysis, margin of safety, we said, is the excess of the budgeted sales over the break-even sales, or the excess of total unit over the break-even unit. And we can calculate it by lessening the total sales, lessening the break-even sales from the total sales, or lessening the break-even unit from the total unit. What is break-even point? We said the break-even point is the level at which the organization either make profit or loss. So it's the level at which the total sales made by the organization is equal to their total cost. It means there is no profit or loss. Then contribution to sales ratio is the percentage of contribution to sales. So these are some of the concepts or terminologies we looked at under break-even analysis. Let's take our evaluation, then we can bring our lesson for today to a close. So for your take-home, whilst you're home, you go through this example to help you understand what we have done today. I know it will be easy for you to calculate. The selling price of a product is 10 cedis. The marginal cost per unit is 6 cedis. When you see marginal cost is the same as variable cost, because marginal cost use variable cost to ascertain the cost of production of a product. So when we refer to marginal cost, we are looking at the variable cost incurred on the product. So we have the marginal cost per unit is 6 cedi, and then the total fixed cost is 6,400 cedis. Our selling price per unit is 6, variable cost is 10, variable cost is 6, and then the fixed cost for the period is 6,400. You are required to calculate the contribution per unit. I hope you'll be able to do that. We said the contribution is equal to our sales or selling price less the variable cost, or selling price less variable cost per unit. And then our break-even point in units and in sales. You know the formula, so just try and input your information or details. Then we have calculate also for the CS ratio. What did we say? The CS ratio, that's our contribution over sales. The margin of safety, we have either in units or in sales. So where the information you have, you should know which one you are going to calculate for. Then E, the quantity of goods to be sold in order to make a target profit of 1,600. So they've given you the target profit the organization wants to ascertain at the end of the period. And then the value of sales to result in a target profit also of 1,600. I hope you'll be able to solve this and prepare the break-even point for the organization so that you can determine whether the organization is making profit or loss. All too soon, we've come to the end of our lesson today. I hope you sit and practice all that you have studied today to build up your confidence. Until we meet again in our next lesson, have a lovely day. My name still remains Madam Judith, and I have been your facilitator for course accounting.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Joy Learning TV.